Good morning, everybody. Thanks for joining. For those who are online already, this is just a quick message to say we will be beginning in approximately 2 minutes' time. Thank you for your patience.
Great. Good morning, all, and good morning to those also listening to us live online. This time we've got videos of our faces, so you can see us online on YouTube, either live now or afterwards as well. So welcome to this market briefing. Just oh, you can't hear me. Right, bear with me. How's that? Can you hear me loud and clear? No? It's strange. It's got the headset on. It's giving me feedback, so I sound really loud, you know? Okay, it's better. Testing, testing. Right, I'm going to put my really loud voice on now. This will be challenging. So first slide here. Can you all hear me now? Yeah. Got everyone at home now turning their volumes down. So this briefing is accredited by the Chartered Insurance Institute, and delegates can claim up to 1 hour CPD for their participation. We will therefore keep a record of those of you logging on online as well as you in the room today. So please contact us afterwards if you require a certificate. So I'm delighted to introduce our speakers today. As most of you know, I'm Paul Hill. I'll be delivering the introduction and chairing our Q&A session afterwards. With questions, please remember we need to repeat them so that our online audience can actually hear the questions. And if possible, if we can leave those questions to the end, we'll leave a spot to answer those accordingly. So I'm pleased to introduce today Jason Bennett, our Salvage Director, and also our SCR, our Special Casualty Representative, to deliver our technical presentation today. We're also delighted to have Charlotte Dodge join us again to deliver a summary of last month's marine casualty cases. Charlotte, for those of you who haven't met her, who didn't join us last month, is a naval architect with us here in London, and has also worked as part of the Marine Warranty Survey team in our Stavanger office in Norway, as well as working with naval architects at ABL Group company Longitude. So, usual caveats apply here. Chatham House rules apply. The information contained in these presentations and any opinions or comments expressed are those of the presenters and not necessarily those of ABL. So just a simple message, we're a global company with a deep bench expertise, but our global footprint allows us to engage with customers with our local experts, bringing that local knowledge. And at the end of today's briefing, we will be asking you kindly to complete a very short feedback form. This is mainly multiple choice, yes and no questions. This is really important, please, to help us continue to improve our maritime market briefings and to ensure we are delivering a briefing which meets your needs as our audience. It only takes 3 minutes to complete, but we really value your thoughts. QR codes such as this one can be found on the desk outside where you registered with Katie. Scan that and it will take you directly to the form. Or there are paper versions as well on the desk, which you can complete and leave with us. Thank you very much. If you're watching online, there's a link to the online survey in the video description underneath the video screen, or you can scan now this QR code here. We will display it on the screen again at the end. So before I pass over to Jason to present our technical discussion, let's take a look at the important learning objectives of today. So hopefully at the end of this, you will understand what the size of the salvage market is today. You'll be able to discuss changes in the balance between emergency response and wreck removal. You'll be able to highlight fundamental differences between award-based salvage, time and material, and lump sum. You'll be able to discuss current challenges in the market, including understanding the impact of Lloyd's review of LOF and the SAB. And finally, before I hand over, we would like you to ask you to give a few moments thought for seafaring men and women at sea today, often working much longer stretches of time than usual due to the ongoing COVID pandemic. ABL Group is a signatory of the Neptune Declaration on seafarer well-being and crew changes. This is a topic close to our heart as many of our surveyors and ourselves come from seafaring backgrounds. So do look into this, please, if you yourselves are interested in becoming a signatory to the Neptune Declaration. It's very important. So over to you, Jason.
Thank you, Paul. Good morning. Good morning to everybody online, and good morning to everybody in the room. If I knew I was wearing a headset, I wouldn't have had my hair done specially, but hopefully we'll fulfill the learning ideals. We'll go over, if I got the right button, our presentation should give you a look. If you're expecting lots and lots of pictures of things blowing up and on fire, there will be some, but also I didn't want to depress people too much. And really, given some of the changes and discussions over the last year in particular, I thought it'd be worth a look back at some of the founding principles, the foundations of what salvage is, what the reasons are for different versions and why awards are different from commercial contracts, etc. Hopefully we'll go over that and we'll go into more detail on each of the aspects, and then the final review of what's been happening recently from our aspects, and at the end afterwards Q&A, which always could be interesting. So a brief history. And despite the grey hair, I wasn't here for all of this, but first of all, what are we looking at? And it depends a little bit on which bit you look at. If you look at the convention, there's a definition of what salvage is. There's also in the Nairobi Convention a definition of what wreck removal is, which helps and guides. The convention one is a bit broader. If you look under law itself, then it's a little bit narrower because it has to be a maritime property. But there are 4 key elements when we're looking at salvage under the law itself. There has to be a marine property. There has to be success. Without it, you're going to get nothing at the end. It has to be a voluntary act. Now, unfortunately, that doesn't mean it comes free. The voluntary bit is that you have a choice as a responder of whether to put yourself forwards to respond. Once you are chosen to respond, then you will be able to claim for a reward afterwards or for whatever it says under your contract. So voluntary act if you're sticking with it under the law. I must admit, in my time now, I did 15 years working in the salvage industry. I did 1 common law salvage. It still worked, got through to a useful result, and eventually was sorted out, but it just took longer, and you can rely on the law. There has to be danger. Without the danger, then what is the need for salvage? You're just doing a more routine service. And as I said before, no success, no cure, no pay. This is as the law stands. not the contractual side of things. And where did it all come from? Well, it came from a long time back. And I wasn't there, and I'm not intimating anybody here was, but all the way back. If you look as far as 500, 300 BCE, then the Rhodian Code and compromised an element which said you will get a percentage of an award for saving property in danger. You go through forwards to the Middle Ages via the Romans, who spread it out through their empire, and by the time you get to 960s or so, the laws of Oleron, for one, mentioned salvage and an award for saving property. It also mentioned at the same time that if you, as a salvage, you may turn up to a vessel and it's aground, do not be surprised when you find a body on the floor, on the deck, because it said if you're a pilot and you put the ship aground, then the crew were entitled to chop your head off as summary justice. They're quite harsh times. I'm glad we weren't doing it, but those were there. But that was a foundation. And it goes through to local application, all the way through Richard, pass forwards, etc. But basically, over a few hundred years, especially in England, you get the Black Book of the Admiralty, and that gathers a system whereby, towards the end of it, by the late 1800s, you've got an established English maritime law, which is fairly unique elements in places, and it's a common law basis. And that, as it says there, salvage is recognised as a right under law. You do not necessarily need a contract. But as I said, I've done one case, and I think the likelihood of them is decreasing. Bear in mind, the likelihood of doing even no cure, no pay salvage is diminishing compared to contractual salvage, as we'll see later in the presentation. So, what is the salvage industry? Everybody talks about it. The statistics behind me are one example. We'll move on to the Lloyd's own stats later. But this is taken from the International Salvage Union. Not everybody doing salvage, not every salvage company is a member of the ISU, and not everybody doing salvage is a salvage company. So this is not the entire worth of the salvage industry, but it gives you an idea, and they certainly represent the majority of the companies who have a permanent interest in salvage. It varies roughly about 50 or so companies on a year-on-year basis. But those figures are taken from 2019, and you'll see that roughly it's about 300 million for the salvage, which is a significant sum, but it's not that significant compared to some other sectors of the market, even the marine market and the non-marine market. So it's worth bearing in mind that when you're talking about it, it is quite a unique area. From that, the Lloyd's form basis was about 60 million revenue recorded from 40 cases. And that represented about 33, about a third of the value from property, hull machinery and cargo, from about 22% of the cases. So the value was higher than the proportion for the number of cases compared to that. I hate the percentage wise, but I'll now use it. If you look, traditionally, they said roughly an award came out on average about 12, 13% of the available salvage fund. Now that varies greatly. If you have a relatively low value property, ship and the cargo, and the job's been really hard and really difficult, lots of danger, etc., and low salvage, you may get a higher percentage of that salvage fund as an award to reflect the efforts, vice versa. However, taking all that as a side and the caveat, then you look at roughly 9% was the award at about 1.5 million for those years. So down a little bit historically. If you compare to contractual salvage, no cure, no pay, non-LOF, then the average job was about 832 million. So a slight difference in what the average was, but I would say that there will be a crossover where some jobs are done on LOF, some are done on contract, which are similar, but at either end, the top end of the LOF, you will not get the contracts, and the bottom end, really, you don't need the LOF. You do the salvage on the other terms. So it's not really comparing like with like, but those are the figures out there. It gives you an idea of what we're talking about as a market, the size. These are from Lloyd's itself, the salvage arbitration branch, which we'll jump forward to in a bit. But if you look at them, it bears out that over between 1999 and 2017, just over 1,500 cases, LOF cases, of which about 1/3 had Scopic incorporated, but just about a quarter had Scopic invoked. Remember, it's a two-stage process. The incorporation of Scopic into a Lloyd's form is a mutual decision between the contracting parties, between the owners and the salvors. The decision to invoke Scopic, but that's just there if needed. It doesn't start ticking until it's invoked. And the decision to invoke it is the sole discretion of the salvo. So it's not the case every time you get one, it's incorporated. It's not the case every time it's incorporated, it's invoked. Those are the figures from Lloyd's itself. And over that period, there will be 8 Scopic arbitrations. So generally, I would presume on that basis, generally accepted by all parties, and it's under review at the moment, which we'll discuss later. The one version, Lloyd's form, is a contract. And by then, if you remember, you've got now within the UK and within England, you've got a system where the common law, the statute with the Merchant Shipping Act brought in, you've got the conventions, 1989 convention, all have a basically fundamentally same take on the law of salvage, what salvage is. So you've got a common understanding of what salvage is. If we look at Lloyd's form, it developed, it's a very simple thing. It developed in the time of steam power. Before that, things were gathered from the beach mainly. When steam power came along, tug owners that I can salve your ship, give me a nice reward, and people came out and lots of contracts came out and very confusing. So I tried to rationalize that, the Lloyd's form came in. It's also to do with the Dardanelles, where Lloyd's went to Turkey and showed this, and Turkish looked at it, did not accept it in full. They created their own Turkish form, but it was a way of streamlining things. And it goes through all the way. One major change was a safety net, which came in the 1980s and has developed through now. Through the safety net originally was to encourage response to a ship of low value or ship and cargo of low value where there was fuel, because suddenly in the late 60s and 70s they invented the environment and invented pollution as far as the public was aware. Before that, the public had not really seen it and were not aware. As soon as the public became aware, industry changed as well, recognised that things had to be done, and the old system did not work fully because there was no value. The salvo would not respond, so they brought the safety net. Went through a few hiccups. The first ones were tankers only. The next ones were restricted to coastal waters or adjacent thereto, and then you had the Article 13 and 14, Article 14 for the safety net of the convention. It's very simple. I think Lloyd's has to say BIMCO made it simple a little bit. They copied, they mimicked the format of BIMCO. Boxes work, and as a contract, there is not that much needs decided beforehand. What needs salving, who the contracting parties are, if you can, where you're going to take it to, but that can be to be decided later, etc. Everything is worked out afterwards. It stands on a system without Lloyd's form fully works with the system which incorporates Lloyd's as well. You have a panel of arbitrators. If you look at them now, there's 3 names listed, including the appeal arbitrator. It was brought in and not much changed. But then you had a little bit of tension. You had various things came into the market. One was the code of practice. With the Scopic clause, which is the latest version of the safety net, you have a code of practice between the international group and between the salvors. And really, that is what Scopic as a thing, as an entirety, Lloyd's on hangs on. So the code of practice says an IG group who sign up to it will accept Scopic. Now, it may not be the case if you're not an international group insurer, but you're also doing liability insurance. You may choose not to accept Scopic, or may choose to accept it. That has to be made clear, and everybody should be aware of that. What else changed? Side letters. Side letters burst out onto the public domain and into the highlight of the sunshine was put on them, let's say 2, 3, 4 years ago, 5 years ago. And when we say side letters, what do we mean by side letters? Well, that's a good question, because there was some confusion and maybe still the confusion. What really was brought to light was that in certain cases, a side agreement was brought to the main contract. And the ones I'm aware of, the ones I've seen in real life or afterwards, examples were, the effect of those was that, in essence, there was an agreement to settle rather than go through the arbitration system. And which was, I suppose, putting in paper, formalizing agreements which were done between parties before that on a relationship basis. As yes, we will definitely try and settle rather than go to arbitration. but it put it down in paper. And also it stated that we'll use a formula to work out what they think the value is, rather than 10 criteria. If you do a Lloyd's form, normally you have 10 criteria. The first one is a salvage fund. There's no salvage fund, there's no award. Once you know the salvage fund, then the rest of it, how much danger, how effective the salvage war, how much gear, how many tugs they've got, how much they maintain, is all down there. And that's brought in from the common law system. And against those 10 criteria, you'll be judged on what, by an arbitrator, if needs be, what the value of the award is. Lloyd's form does have this factor of encouragement in there, which is one reason why, for a like-by-like service, under the Lloyd's form system, you may well end up paying more than under a pure contractual negotiated contract, because of the encouragement factor to maintain that response. However, the side letters came in, and the effect I've seen is that there was agreement to use a formula to work on what we think the settlement value should be, rather than everybody going round, doing a round robin, what's this worth? Also, the ones I'm aware of were if Scopic was invoked, for instance, then the side letter was torn apart. However, and fell aside, and things were judged normally, as per Lloyd's form Scopic. That did raise concern when it came to light, and that was brought out eventually into the daylight and was discussed by the industry. And that's been reflected in some of the changes. So if you now, for instance, do a Lloyd's form Scopic and you invoke Scopic, then you, as a salvor, are obliged to accept an ISU 5 guarantee, a written form of guarantee for that Scopic security. And that Scopic security has been amended in there, which states the clause saying that if a side letter exists, it has to be brought to the attention of the insurers before the agreement. And if it's found out to exist afterwards, and if it affects the balance of payments between the parties, then the guarantee can be torn away, is null and void. Those are the developments that went forward via various committees over a few years, and that is the state at the moment. So you have a position where it became a light, it was addressed, that's been addressed in writing, and as far as I'm aware at the moment, that is the status we have at the present. I'm not actually aware of that many in existence at the moment. But certainly for a focus, immediately prior to lockdown, that was a key part of the industry discussion going on. The other bit, another one, was towage. That's been bubbling along for many years. Towage and towage under Lloyd's form, and how much is it worth? Remember before I said under Lloyd's form, you have 10 criteria to judge how much a job's worth. First one being the salvage fund, no cure, no pay. There's no salvage fund, nothing. But assuming there is a salvage fund, there'll be an award. And then you have the 10 criteria of danger, etc. That became quite contentious as to the amount people saw that for the amount of physical work or time and materials basis looking at things that was done, the award for a relatively simple towage maybe, or maybe not, but for a towage requiring nothing else other than towage was disproportionate. And I went through various iterations of discussion. There was a reaction. The arbitrations were changed, the panel format was changed. There were a ruling, of course, with the Vutakos in 2008. You have discussions of matters such as proportionality, basically relating whether Lloyd's forms should at all be related to a commercial contract, and if so, on what basis to do it. One reaction to that one was the discussion of a Lloyd's form light, and that had various elements to it, basically aimed at the amount of award would be assessed, but would still be on lesser generally than if there'd been other actions such as putting fires out, removing cargo, etc. It had various elements to it, including direct recovery by the salvor from the property interests separately, hull machinery, cargo. And at the moment, although things are paused during lockdown, so we'll wait to see when people get talking together, I think that had died down a little bit. I did not see the prospect of Lloyd's form light being brought into reality. Maybe it will, but at the moment I think it's in abeyance. But that is one area of discussion I think may come up again, especially if you see more emergency tows. Certainly at the moment, I'm aware of Lloyd's forms where there has been towage involved, but there's also been physical damage and other factors, flooding, etc. So the pure LOF light, we'll wait to see where that comes in. But towage is one area where it is always a bit contentious. If it is that simple, two things. The award should reflect how much danger was there. So there's no thing in principle to stop a simple towage in conditions of heavy weather, etc., where a vessel needs immediate response. There's nothing to stop being done on Lloyd's form. The award should also reflect the fact that if there were no other dangers, it wasn't going aground, it wasn't on fire, etc., that should all be reflected. At the same time, if a towage is that simple, then it should not be take much negotiation time to negotiate a commercial contract. And there are several forms out there of which you can do a towage contract under more commercial terms. So whether taking those two into mind, you then see the emergence of Lloyd's Form Light, I'm not sure. But it's certainly an area being discussed. The code of practice at the moment is under review. For the principal one, there is a code of practice between the IG and between the property market, and then between the IG and the Salvos covering this. Things are under review at the moment, along with the BIMCOs, which I'll discuss in a second. I'm aware my primary audience here is not the P&I market, but being a recently been on the SCR panel, it's worthwhile mentioning because, yes, the SCR gets nominated, gets put forward, gets appointed by the P&I club. But that is because it's a matter you need somebody, you need a party to take charge of the process. Ruled by committee during an incident is not the best way. Remember that the SCR represents all salved interests. If you have a Lloyd's form with scoping incorporated and scoping invoked, then the SCR is there to represent all salved interests. And all salved interests should get the same information, the same feedback. And ultimately, the SCR is there to be on site, to engage with the salvors, and also to assist with the best outcome of the operation. The consolidated guidelines, first of all, there are consolidated guidelines. As things develop over years, guidance comes out in various formats. There are two main streams, and they were brought together. They're formed into a consolidated guidance a few years back now, and currently they're under review. Just had an email around a couple of days ago from Nick Haslam, who's the leader of the pack for SCRs, inviting any comments from current SCRs into that. So that's a process which is ongoing at the minute. So by all these various means, the guidelines being reviewed, the SCR guidelines being reviewed, and how you have your chance to reflect and influence exactly what goes on site. So there are other means of doing it. It's not all Lloyd's form. It's not all based on the contract which this institution started back in the day, agreed in 1908, I believe started in the 1890s. And that Lloyd's form does incorporate encouragement and does incorporate no cure, no pay. But maybe it's a bit disconcerting at times with the modern way of thinking. And so you have more normal commercial contracts. You can start with a blank piece of paper. And some of the contracts I've seen where it's all red from the existing ones, sometimes it would be better to start with a blank piece of paper. But having said that, in general, there are some well-known contracts out there, and BIMCO, as a group, has produced some good ones based on input from cross-working parties with representatives from all the industry on it. I was at Rotterdam in the headquarters then when one of my team went and worked on the previous BIMCO revisions, along with insurers from property market, along with insurers from the liability market, along with lawyers. So generally the forms that come out are balanced and do the job they're suited for. You have the tow hire. Very useful, incorporates provisions for towage and can be used for emergency tows and is used for emergency tows. You do have supply time as well. That's an alternative and has been used successfully for salvage tows throughout the years. What I would say for both of those is your contract has to be fundamentally suited to what the operation is. If you have an operation which could develop over time or needs more than a salvage than a tow, then it needs, the clauses can be amended, but the more you amend the clauses, you run the danger of conflicting, of clauses not working out correctly, especially if they're done in the short time period available when everybody's thinking, everybody needs assistance, what we're going to do it. Negotiating clauses, you don't want the time delay, and you don't want something which may clash with itself. But you also have the BIMCOs. Now, do not get put off by the REC thing and think, all right, it's all P&I. There's actually a subheading to these contracts, which is a marine services contract. They're very suited to normal marine operations. They're very suited to emergency response as they stand. The caveat there is they shouldn't negotiate, then shouldn't involve delay. It should not imperil the vessel, the craft, shouldn't imperil the property you're trying to save. And of course, not said of all this is lives, should not imperil lives. So as long as it's not delay, then they can be suited. And that does work more on a time and material basis, more common to you. You go to the garage, here's my time, here's my labour, here's my parts, thank you very much. When negotiating them, then it should be balanced, I would say. There are ongoing revisions at the moment, and I think it'll take a while yet to see the current versions be amended, but those are the latest ones out there, and the panel is meeting to discuss some of them. There's a review by Hugh at the moment, who was the second SOS rep, and that's been commissioned by the international group, and that is reviewing, could the increasing use of commercial contracts cause delays? Could it affect the successful outcome of an operation? I won't preempt it. It contacted many people across the industry, and we'll be watching that with interest to see what comes out if and when the IG concluded and the IG released the findings of that one. It's certainly an interesting aspect, and I think it's certainly worthwhile doing. It also has to be suited, so remember, make sure they're suited for purpose. Doing a job where I was involved in one where the vessel had partially collapsed alongside, was a live emergency, and was negotiated on commercial contract, but then also trying to do that on a lump sum can just about be possible. But it is fraught, it is tense, and it can cause problems on everybody's part, both the salvors, the insurers, the owners. So really look at what you're trying to get out of this, trying to get a fair deal, but balance it, I would say, on commercial ones. And that is ultimately the best interest of everybody, the salve party, the property insurers as well. You probably won't pay as much as under a Lloyd's form because you're missing the encouragement element. That's the principal reason. Under review moments, it's primarily to do with the liability side, clause 4, clause 7, for termination of the rights or ability to amend the contracts. If the situation changes, remember, Lloyd's form, you do not have to describe the situation. If things change, gets worse, the salvor cannot come around and say, oh, hang on a minute, I thought I just was doing a tow, now it's on fire, it's about to hit the rocks, I need 3 tugs and 20 people, and I've only got 1 and 10. That's immaterial. Lloyd's form just says, you've taken this on, get me into a better position. The commercial contract, hopefully, is written to encompass some of the changes, enough changes. And that's one aspect where you have good practitioners on all sides that can help. If it's not, if it's too narrowly defined, or the situation changes too much, then it can be one area for problems. If you've taken out the ability to change because the clause has been removed or amended, that can also be an issue. And that's what we're seeing potentially in some of the areas stricken through. But there's also a discussion at the moment about amending the contracts to incorporate the ability to leave that in or change the ability to change. There's also a discussion over QRA, quantitative risk assessments. It's not really used in a live image response. So I'll be very brief on that one. It's an aspect mainly on wreck removal, for which most of the parties interested here are looking at the other side of things, but also some liability insurance will be written here. And of course, a lot, if it becomes big enough, comes back here. And it's just whether for the complicated jobs to use a more, rather than people like myself, whoever's sitting around saying, yes, I think that could go wrong if this happens, and that's about that much level, let's give it a 5, let's give it a 3, and that's about the level of risk. Qualitative risk assessment. Quantitative is where the scientists come in, use an algorithm, work a formula, and you work out to a percentile you choose. So the 85th percentile, this will be okay, and it'll cost about that much. That's been discussed. I think it'll be one issue where it may take a while for all parties to settle exactly how it's used, who uses it, and at what stage in the party, in the interest. From that, you also have a look at a review again of the code of practice. What's it all mean for people like themselves? It varies. Since joining here in June 2020, and then coming onto the SCR panel as of January, the following January. So far, I've left the house a little bit. I've come to the office mainly though. I've been to site a little bit. I have not yet done a role as a SCR, ready and waiting when everybody is. But it's been quite interesting. I have been able to provide live support via remote technology, either purely remotely or with a surveyor on the scene who can get there, who's not prohibited by COVID restrictions. And with that, and combine that and some of my grey hairs and grey knowledge, provide live support to ship owners directly, to insurers, as to, yes, this situation, yes, maybe that's what you need, yes, you do need support, maybe, yes, that sort of contract and that basis the operation looks okay. And that seems to have worked quite well. Personally speaking, I also will like to get out to sites, get a bit of wind through the greying hair and see it. But if needs be, and it can work quite well remotely, and that's been done. On the other aspect, on the more liability side, being able to put together in live situations an estimate of what I think a job should be and should give you a cost or give you a heads up what it's likely to be. And through to the other end, which is not really for here, but through to running an ITT, currently doing one at the moment for a casualty, where that will hopefully move to a contracted contractor and a successful resolution to the moment a problem with a casualty in trouble. So it can be done, and it is ongoing, and it's been quite an interesting journey. But if anybody wants me to dash off, stand on the cliff tops and get some air through and do it, quite like to do that as well. I hope, going through just about on time, bit of a run through, a bit of a coverage from the 500 BC through to now. What the aim was to try and give you a flavour of why there are sometimes some fundamental differences between what a job may be worth, what a type of response would be under common law, under Lloyd's form, no cure, no pay, under a contracted basis. Why they exist, and also so where some of the tensions come by. We can't discuss them all. There's many, many, many you can look at. But some of those have come to the light, have been discussed, and have, at least for now, temporarily been resolved. However, if you have any questions, feel free. Thank you. Oh, did I? Yeah, unless you want the questions afterwards.
Hi, Jason. Thanks very much. Hugh from ABL Maritime Lawyers. Thank you very much. Very, very interesting talk there. One thing that struck me was you talked about supply time briefings for salvage services, and in my experience, that tends to come up in the context of a yellow pages sale or bringing in a vessel, and then they're under pressure to contract under supply time because that's what the person buyer seems to do it. Then they try and pass that on to the hull underwriters or whoever it is that are actually responsible for paying at the end of the day. But it's not a contract that's designed for salvage. And I'm just quite interested to hear when you said it's been used successfully, because in my experience it is when everything goes right, but actually salvage is a risky business. And when it goes wrong, there are lots of unintended consequences. So one comment that I make, and I'm sure you know more about this than me, is that if you are a underwriter or a ship owner, or indeed a P&I insurer, then look very, very carefully before you agree to supply time, because it's simply not designed for the task.
Yeah. So for the audience online, the question was about supply time and whether, in fact, it could be used successfully in a salvage situation. So yes, I stand by it. I have seen it used successfully. But yes, I also agree with you. It's been used successfully in the ones which are not complicated. It does make it easier sometimes for the tow provider to accept. Whether or not it's the so-called yellow page salvo, I've used it as a non-yellow page salvo, because of time, availability, situation, right vessel, right time. That was a contract put forward, more acceptable to them, avoids delay, and the situation meant that it could be used. But if things change or develop a need addressing at the time, or things go wrong, then it does not address many issues which are there. They're simply not there because they're not designed for it. So I do agree with that. You're welcome. Okay. Thank you. We'll move on. One too far. I'll pass you over to Charlotte. Step that way.
Thank you, Jason. Good morning, everyone. Can everyone hear me in here? Yeah, okay, perfect. So now we'll move on and look at some of our cases in a bit more detail. So first of all, what are the ABL case reports? The purpose of this section of the briefing is simply to keep you updated on some of the recent higher cost incidents that ABL have been involved in, and in doing so, show you some of the sorts of incidents and casualties that can happen in shipping and marine operations. These feature largely, but not exclusively, hull and machinery casualties with estimated cost of repair in excess of $250,000, usually excluding salvage costs. These only cover a subset of the total ABL caseload, typically in the order of 10%. Now, this is an important subset which represents about 25% of the hull and machinery cases by number, and around 65 to 75% of the hull and machinery cases we survey by cost. Estimated costs are often preliminary and subject to further inspections and/or investigations. In presenting these case reports for the last month, it's not about attributing blame. There won't be any specifics of cause, as many of the cases are still fresh, so it wouldn't be appropriate to do so, and in many cases the cause is still under investigation. A copy of this presentation or a previous one is available on request. So as usual, let's start off with some statistics. So what you can see here is an overview of January of this year, the proportions of cases by number. So starting on the left, you can see that the majority of our cases we were instructed on in January were engine room machinery cases. This was followed by a couple of collision-elision cases, and there were also cases of fire, grounding, and as we move to the right, we can see there was also a thruster damage case and one other. From the 2021 information, it shows an overview of the cases we surveyed last year, and as this year develops, we might see more of the categories become populated. So this is an overview of January again, but proportions by number and cost. So in terms of the cost for January, we can see that the engine room machinery cases dominated the figures for the month, with another quite significant proportion from the collision cases. And the remainder of the costs were made up of relatively smaller proportions of all of the others. The average cost for the month is approximately $1.2 million, which is slightly lower than last year's average total of just under 1.3 million. The annual typical background expected figure is about 1 million per high cost casualty, when extremes of over 50 million are excluded. So now we're moving on to the cumulative total so far. Obviously it's only January, but so from this overview, as I've mentioned, it shows that so far engine and machinery cases have been the most common that we work on, and that we've had healthy instructions on a variety of other work with groundings, fire and explosions, collisions and others, adding to that total. And you can see that at the moment we're following a relatively similar trend to 2021. And again, this is the costs, the cumulative total, proportions by number and cost. As it's only the beginning of the year, it doesn't really tell us that much about the distribution of costs in 2022. But it does show that so far collision-elision cases make up a significant proportion of the costs encountered, whilst the engine room machinery cases still make up the greatest proportion. As mentioned, the average cost so far for the high cost cases currently sits at 1.2 million. But as it's only January, we're sure that this will change over the coming months. So let's move on to look at some of our cases in a bit more detail. First up for this month, this matter involved a bulk carrier which is over 25 years of age and approximately 35,000 deadweight tons, built in Germany and classed with Lloyd's register. It was reported that while entering a lock, the chief engineer heard a loud noise from the starboard main engine. They had observed smoke coming out of unit number 7. Both main engines were declutched and the propeller pitch put to 0. There was no fire or explosion noticed. However, the connecting rod was found out of the crankcase door, damaging the adjacent engine parts. In this picture, the crank pin damage is shown to the journal and the webs. In terms of the nature of repairs, the engine is to be disassembled and the engine block and crankshaft will be renewed. Unit number 7 parts renewed, including the corresponding section of the camshaft. The following extent of damage was found. The cylinder liner is in pieces as shown and damages to the block inside the sump. The crankshaft, the counterweights were parted from the shaft with the studs sheared off. The cylinder liner lower part was found in pieces in the block and the engine sump, and the crankcase side doors of unit number 7 were found destroyed. The piston crown was found separated from the skirt with palm studs elongated and broken, and the connecting rod big end bearing cover was found separated with bolts bent and sheared off. In this picture, you can see the exhaust valve cam on the camshaft. Please note the hardness layer has gone and the surface is very rough. No dry docking is required for the permanent repair to take place. The repair time is 4 months, depending on spare parts delivery lead time, and the approximate value of this repair is $2.5 million US. No allegation, of course, has been submitted. So this next case is a tug and barge combination of approximately 27,000 deadweight tons and 10 to 15 years of age, built in the USA and classed with ABS. So it was reported that the tug and barge combination was underway when they were inbound to a bay under pilotage. Just before passing a bridge, a fishing vessel was noted to be in the course of the tug and barge combination. The vessel had been noticed by the tug's bridge team, and VHF warnings, horn blasts, and all lamp alerts were given. Reportedly, it then appeared that the fishing vessel was altering course to get out of the channel. However, it then swung around and ended up on a collision course on the port side of the tug and barge combination. Then the collision occurred. The tug and barge combination and the fishing vessel separated. No casualties were reported, and the authorities were notified. The tug and barge combination was then able to continue its voyage to the port. The vessel berthed safely at its intended berth that night, and the following day the tug and barge were attended by the authorities and company representatives. In the picture here, the portside handrail is damaged in various locations. There is also damage to the ballast pump. There is also some damage to the tug, with scratch paint coating portside aft shell plating, which is approximately 20 foot in length. It is estimated that once replacement parts are received, some 8 days will be required to effect the recommended repair at a cost of $600,000 US to the tug and barge. So this picture shows the fishing vessel, which, as you can see, has damage to the starboard net boom, which is folded in half. The wire rigging is in the process of being cleared. The bow anchor pulpit is bent out to port, and no damage is noted to the starboard hull. The crew on board and a company representative did not allow access to our surveyor on board the third-party vessel. However, from the quayside, the following was observed. The vessel is a trawler-type fishing vessel of welded steel construction, fitted with 2 net booms. As mentioned, the starboard net boom was found folded in half, with the end part where the rigging is attached missing. It appears that the starboard boom was disconnected from the connection on the deckhouse roof. The running rigging was found all entangled, and the crew was in the process of clearing the entanglements. The bow pulpit anchor housing was found bent open, torn out of the pulpit, mostly to port, and the anchor was found missing during the first attendance. During the second attendance, the anchor was found in place, albeit the housing was still distorted open. The undersigned surveyor agrees that the damages cited were reasonably the result of the alleged collision. The bow anchor was found reinstalled at the last attendance. No pricings have been submitted by a third party. So moving on to the next case, this is a dredger of over 20 years of age, built in the Netherlands and approximately 6,000 deadweight tons and classed with Bureau Veritas. It was reported that the non-propelled suction dredger had been engaged in a project. It then returned from the dredging area to the jetty due to bad weather. At the same time, the maintenance generator engine was started and put on load. Approximately 2.5 hours later, an electrical power failure occurred and was followed by a fire alarm, which had activated in the maintenance generator room, which is located on the port side of the main deck of the vessel. An inspection by the watchkeeping engineer found that there was a fire and smoke coming from the space. The engine was immediately stopped, and the centre main diesel generator was started, put on load, and power was returned to the dredger. The crew commenced fighting the fire using the nearest dry powder extinguishers. At the same time, the crew were carrying out boundary cooling for the wall outside the generator room. Shortly after that, the fire was considered to be completely extinguished. The chief engineer then carried out an inspection and found that the engine lubricating oil had splashed onto the generator room at bulkhead and deck, and that the crankcase doors for units number 3A and 4B were smashed, and broken components were laying on the deck. Dry docking is not required to effect permanent repairs. The main power cables from the alternator were found to be variously burnt, molten, and affected by fire and heat as a result of the fire. The engine must be removed to the workshop, dismantled and repaired as found necessary with new parts, seals and gaskets. The dry sump must also be thoroughly cleaned and the entire lube oil system must be flushed out and the oil charge replenished upon completion of permanent repairs. There was a failure of the gudgeon pin retainer pin of Unit 4B bank. There was loss of connecting rod, failure of the piston and the cylinder liner, which led to the debris which contacted and damaged the crankshaft and counterweights. The broken counterweight smashed the crankcase doors, leading to release of the lubricating oil and the subsequent fire, spilling outside of the crankcase, where it came into contact with the exhaust gas manifold, which led to the fire. Based upon the maker's confirmation that the damaged engine is obsolete, the permanent repairs are expected to take about 45 days in total to complete, once either spare parts or a replacement engine are available on site, at a cost of $450,000. It is the opinion of our surveyor that the damages may reasonably be attributed to the nature of the alleged cause. The final matter is a barge of over 25 years old, built in the USA and class does not apply to this vessel. It was reported that a tug was pushing 4 barges lashed together and all of the barges were reportedly fully laden with grain. The tug and barges combination was heading along their expected route when a derelict sailboat was discovered in their path. The tug reportedly reduced the speed and the wind was reported at 50 to 70 knots from the stern. The tug was reportedly attempting a turn to starboard, however the tow did not respond as quickly as expected and one of the barges ran aground. It was further reported that the vessel was removed from the rocks and refloated and it discharged its cargo and then it was temporarily repaired for transit to the dry dock as shown here. So the bottom plating was heavily set in and hauled on the port and starboard sides, and the side shell was hauled on the port side too. They will also need to crop and renew approximately £35,000 of steel, including potential damage to the internal structure, but we have only surveyed this vessel externally at this stage. In terms of the estimated repair cost, we estimate that they will be in the region of around $750,000, subject to adjustment once the full extent of damage is known and quotations are received. This will include costs for refloating and approximately $550,000 for steel repairs alone. The repairs will be done on dry dock over an approximate 45-day period. So that brings us to the end of the case reports today, and I'll hand back over to Paul.
Charlotte. Thank you, Jason. I've got to repeat this again, so sorry about that, but this is a requirement for our certification. There are no more questions for Jason. Last chance. Nope, good. Jason's going to be here afterwards if you want to approach him individually. I'd like to just briefly recap on today's learning objectives. This is an important part of our CPD accreditation. I want to ensure that we're meeting the objectives that we've set for you. So you hopefully be able to walk away today with understanding what the size of the salvage market is. You'll be able to discuss changes in the balance between emergency response and wreck removal. You'll be able to highlight fundamental differences between award-based salvage, time and material, and lump sum. You'll be able to discuss current challenges in the market, including understanding the impact of Lloyd's review of LOF and the SAB. And as you know, the interesting part, we hold a prize draw every month, and one lucky winner wins a bottle of the finest champagne. Now here's a picture of one of our previous happy winners. To be our next winner, what you have to do is answer our prize draw, 2 prize draw questions, which will be sent out to you tomorrow in an email, following up on today's session. Unfortunately, the prize draw is only available to our in-person attendees, so apologies to our virtual attendees, but perhaps we'll see you in person next time. So I'm delighted to announce this month's winner is Chris Hale. Is Chris Hale here? He's not here. Sorry? Sorry, I can't hear you with this one. So I didn't realize we Yes, sorry. Okay, good. Okay, there we go. Thank you very much. Yep. And lastly, just to let you know, we're kicking off quarterly curry lunches next week, Thursday, the 24th of September. So this will be in our office in the Minories from 12:30 to 1500. So if you haven't received an invite, please let us know, as everyone is welcome to this. So it's just a fun get together for a curry, drinks and conversation. So we hope to see you there. Thank you, and have a nice day.